Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of the Geeking Out podcast. I am the Athletic Geek, and I am honored this week to have as my guest one of the, one of the late unsung heroes of AAPW and later on Stride Pro Wrestling, former Billy Hills. Billy, thank you so much for being on here.
Hey, thank you so much for having me, sir. I greatly appreciate it.
So, my first question is the same for all my wrestling guests. Were you a fan of pro wrestling growing up?
I was, and I'm sure it's probably kind of like some where either their parents or their grandparents was watching it and they kind of, stumbled upon it one day kind of thing. And mine was kind of similar. It was with my great grandparents,
Okay.
actually. Um, I had on Saturday mornings, I'd always heard like a loud ruckus coming from the living room. But of course, I'm tucked away in my room, eating my cereal, watching my own cartoons and stuff. So I only heard the loud ruckus. I never knew what it was. Um, Up until I got a little older, I was probably, say, 6, 7 years old. And back whenever renting movies was still a thing,
Right.
my great grandmother on a Friday after school. I do remember it was after school, so it was probably like kindergarten, first grade or so. She took me to go rent some movies for the weekend, and in the new release section, there was just this humongous VHS box at the time. It was just massive. And there was just this humongous guy on the front of it, draped in the American flag with an American bandana on, a yellow Fu Manchu. We can just take a wild guess who it is.
Lex Luger? No, I'm just kidding.
So
We all know
I
it's Hogan.
was
We all know it's
immediately
Hogan.
just attracted to that image. I'm like, hey, I don't know what this is, but that guy looks awesome. Can I get that? And they're like, are you sure that's what you want? I'm like, yeah, he looks cool. I want that. So they got it for me, and I was hooked ever since because right before we took it back on Sunday, they're like, did you like it? I'm like, I freaking love it. They're like, well, maybe next weekend, we'll watch some with you. And then I got introduced into Memphis wrestling because I'm originally from a little bit further south than where we are now. So we were a lot closer to Memphis. So we picked up Memphis wrestling. And after I seen Memphis wrestling and Jerry Lawler, PG-13, and all those other guys back then, I was done. I was hooked, and I've not stopped ever since.
So you were growing up in that area. You were a big Lawler fan.
100%. Him, PG-13, Brian Christopher, Jeff Jarrett. My goodness. There was another gentleman, he unfortunately didn't become too much of a big thing, but he went by the Spellbinder. I think he might have did like a couple of little appearances in WWE, but he never,
He was
not much ever came out of it.
Fantasio, wasn't he? I
Yes.
might be mistaken there. So if someone who knows that I'm wrong, let me know in the comments section below and let me know I'm wrong nicely. But I believe he was Fantasio.
I want to say that that is correct.
Okay, but yeah, I remember. You're bringing up Brian Christopher and Spellbinder, and this is just reminding me of the whole. There's going to be a section of the audience that maybe doesn't know I'm talking about the big infamous thing they did on Memphis TV back in '99, where they like blurred the lines with Doug Gilbert and yeah.
Mm. Oh, yeah, yes. I know what you're talking. Yes, I remember this angle exactly, but I want to see if anybody in the comment section of this knows exactly which one we're talking
Yeah,
about. I
definitely.
want to test a little bit of their knowledge
Yeah.
because I know exactly which one you're talking about.
And I wasn't even able to watch Memphis wrestling at the time. I just remember like whenever I got the internet, they're like, "Hey, take a look at this," and I'm like, "What? What is this? Like,
Uh huh.
what is Grandmaster
Yep.
Sexay doing?" you know?
What is he doing down there in this?
What's he? Why is he saying these things? And who's that guy? And isn't that the guy from ECW that's there? And yeah, but okay, so big Memphis wrestling fan. Were you ever? And I'm not. I'll fully concede I'm maybe not the best historian on all of Memphis wrestling besides that infamous moment. But were they still doing Mid South Coliseum shows? Were you ever lucky enough to get to go to the Mid South Coliseum?
Yes and yes. I was lucky enough to go to a few. Again, it was great grandparents that took me, and they was still running Mid South Coliseum shows.
Okay.
Um, the only thing I've unfortunately not had the privilege of doing was actually working inside the Mid South Coliseum. That's the only thing I've not been able to check off a bucket list as far as like my southern bucket list things go. Like I've wrestled in Memphis, I've done TV down there, uh, inside the WMC TV5 station where old Memphis wrestling was taped. I've done those things, but actually wrestle inside the Mid South Coliseum is the only thing I've missed out on so far.
Dang. Um.
But I do have a connection that says anytime I'm in Memphis, to just call them and they will come open the place up for me and just let me look around. So I might take him up on that one day.
Um.
And if wrestling breaks out, it breaks out. It's not my fault.
All right. So you've established that you were attracted to the image of Hulk Hogan, and becoming a fan that way, and then eventually Jerry Lawler and all the favorites down in Memphis. As you're growing up, are you thinking about being a pro wrestler, or are you just kind of thinking like, oh, this is neat, this is fun, but I want to be a fireman, or I want to be a football player, or what? Were you thinking being a pro wrestler as a kid, or were you thinking
No,
something
I
else?
was not. I was 100% thinking of something else. I was actually scheduled to go to college for something else, but I opted to one day just drop all of that and, you know, go train locally back home where I'm from. And there is one person that I have to thank for that, and that was Samoa Joe.
Okay. Well, before we get into
Because
Joe,
during,
did you have any
sure,
did you have any athletic background that was kind of preparing you, or that would later go on to prepare you for the for wrestling training, or were you?
oh yes, I actually did, and this is going to probably, shock a few people who I've not talked about this with, which isn't too many. But growing up where I was from, you learned how to swim one of two ways. You got thrown into the Mississippi River and told to bring your butt back, or there was a lady who could teach you how to swim. But in order for her to teach you how to swim, she also had to teach you gymnastics.
Really?
So, yes. So, with that being said, at again, ripe young age, be it, first, second, third, fourth, I think I was going into fifth grade whenever I stopped gymnastics.
Okay.
Because I absolutely loved the uneven bars. I absolutely loved them. And it was great stretching, just absolute amazing, just cardiovascular as well. I mean, I was able to drop, the swimming, learning how to swim, after, the first course of that. That was, easy breezy lemon squeezy. But I stuck with the gymnastics side of things. And of course, like most young boys growing up, 9 times out of 10, you played a sport of some sort: baseball, basketball, football, etc. If there was a sport for me to sign up on, I signed up on it and played it all the way through high school. Whatever they would let me sign up for, athletic wise, I signed up for it. Back home, again, it was kind of a weird situation because in our grade school, once you got to eighth grade, you had to pick between three different schools on where you wanted to go to high school. It wasn't one of those where you just transition, on up to that school's high school curriculum.
Okay.
You were kind of secluded away from the other schools around you. You were where some of the other schools that had graduating classes of 100 kids, mine was 15.
Okay.
That's just kind of how secluded this little school was. But once you graduated eighth grade, you had a choice to go to three other schools. And that's where everything really kind of started blossoming, I should say, athletic wise for me because got more opportunities that way.
Gotcha. So okay, you're going back. What did Samoa Joe do for you? How did you like? This is definitely intriguing me, but I wanted to add more context to all this. But like, how did you meet
Of
Samoa
course.
Joe, or what happened there?
So I didn't get to meet Joe up until later on, which I will get to that one here in I'm sure in all of this. But it was a Friday evening after school, flipping through channels on television, and I come across professional wrestling on FSN, and it was Impact. And they were replaying Samoa Joe's debut against Chris Sabin. And I finally had somebody that I could visually relate to because you see me, Eli, I'm a big guy.
Right.
There, of course, was always bigger wrestlers. You had Big Boss Man, Earthquake, Typhoon, Bam Bam. The list just goes on and on. Vader. Um, but I could never really relate to any of those guys, really. But whenever I watch Samoa Joe, I'm like, wait, that guy's doing a heck of a lot more than just punching and kicking people. And I was done. I'm like, okay, if that guy can do that, I can do that. And
Interesting.
it was mind blowing because here he was hitting suicide dives. It's just he's Samoa Joe.
Right.
You know, even back then on FSN, early days of Impact, outside of Nashville, Samoa Joe was just being Samoa Joe basically, and I
And you
was
probably
just
weren't even
amazed by it.
aware of like the body of work he had like in the independents
Nothing.
before all of that.
Nope. I didn't even know what TNA was up until I seen that. I just stopped on the channel because it was wrestling. I'm like, what is this six-sided thing? Who is this big giant Samoan? Who is this feisty little redheaded guy? I'm loving this. And then, my whole wrestling spectrum grew from Memphis, WWE, and WCW. I then found out about TNA, and then Ring of Honor, and then AAA, then New Japan, and everything as far as wrestling just blew up in my brain. And that whole like little cartoon where like the little brain explodes, it was the epitome of that.
So
Because I wanted to find anything Samoa Joe was doing, and then it was early days of the internet. So,
right.
you were finding little things, here, little things there, and you're just like, oh my God, this is amazing. And of course, tape trading was still a thing, so I started doing that with people. It was just opened so many doors in the brain and just in general.
So you were quite the connoisseur of pro wrestling at that point in time, and you were still in high school at this time.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so Samoa Joe, as you change, puts all your future plans on hold, and you're all in on pro wrestling. How did you go about pursuing that dream? How did you go about finding uh, a school? What was your mindset as you prepared for your pro wrestling journey?
I didn't. It came to me.
Okay.
Uh, I was sitting at home after baseball practice, and I got a phone call from a friend of mine. He's like, "Hey, I don't know how legit this is." He's like, "But I found somebody who lives 5 minutes from me and claims to wrestle at an independent show 30 minutes from us. And he said he would train us. He's like, do you want to go Saturday and see if this is legit or not and check this guy out?" I'm like, duh. Like, duh, absolutely. Yes, we're going to go. He's like, all right, cool. So we went to the Jukebox Cafe in Dyersburg, Tennessee. And it was a company called New Blood Wrestling was the name of it. And they kind of wanted to base themselves around not using, your local Memphis legends. They wanted to kind of give younger talent and talent that hadn't been, given an opportunity at this, hence the name New Blood.
Okay.
And we went on a Saturday night. We paid our tickets. We kind of, sat in the back row and, just observed everything. And lo and behold, we see one of our best friends that we're in school with wrestling on the show. He had been training and hadn't told anybody. Hadn't told us nothing. So we're like, okay, if he's doing this and he trusts these guys, we trust him, we're doing it. And literally, that was on a Saturday, and on Wednesday we were in a ring.
Wow.
It was that quick of a turnaround.
So who were the trainers at that school?
At that school, it was pretty much just my trainer. He's unfortunately passed away now, but it was Tim Robertson, and he went by the gimmick Tank. He was 6'6", about 375, 400, depending on a good day. He was a big guy, real big guy, and just athletic as all get out. He was he mixed the styles where he wouldn't do your suicide dives or anything like that. He would do some of, a few of Samoa Joe's little moves here, where like your olays and things like that in the corner, and a few spots like that. But other than that, he kept it very old school as well. Big moves on your pick, punches, kicks, slams. Every once in a while, he'd break out a leg lariat, just to show, hey, yeah, I'm, 400 plus pounds on, a bit of a smaller frame, but I could still kick these guys' heads off if I needed to.
Right.
And that really attracted me to him as well, because I'm like, okay, I'm a bigger guy. He's a bigger guy. He's throwing out a few things like Samoa Joe, who boosted my confidence in being able to do this. He's right there doing it for the most part as well, so he can show me. So I will put my body and, my trust in him to show me this. And he did.
So
And I just never looked back.
So what was your training like? I've had a lot of the Stride guys on here who talk about Heath Hatton's method of training them. You
It was honestly the exact same that they
gotcha,
got. There
gotcha.
was a lot of drills. I'm talking drills on drills on drills on drills, Eli. Literally, I do not mind telling this story whatsoever, but this is 100% my fault. This had nothing to do with my trainer or anybody else who was there that evening. But we were doing flip buck drills, which is something that you learn for hip tosses and arm drags. And I really had to use the bathroom. It wasn't number two. I had to go number one.
Well, that's good at least.
And yeah, oh, thank God. Yes, absolutely. But I really had to go to the bathroom. I didn't say anything. I wanted to get through my drill first and then be like, okay, I need to go to the restroom. I'll be right back. I didn't want to mess up the flow of mine and my training partner's practice. I didn't want to mess that flow up. So we had to do a set of 20 in a row. I'm on 8 or 9, and I can't hold it anymore. I hit a couple more, and it's just like, nope, we're done being in you. And it just, yep, there it goes. And, Tim, my trainer, he looks at me, he's like, what? Why didn't you just say you had to go to the bathroom? I'm like, I didn't want to stop practice. He's like, it's okay if you have to go to the bathroom. Just be like, hey, I got to go to the bathroom. It would have been fine. I'm like, I couldn't do it. I didn't want to stop practice. I wanted to keep going because it was fun for me. It was new. It was fun, and I didn't want to stop at that time. I didn't want to stop, so I just kept going, even having to go to the bathroom. So he's like, just, go clean yourself up. So I did. I went cleaned up, and I had a change of clothes and everything in my car, changed up, went back, finished everything, and, got ribbed for the rest of the day, actually probably for a couple of weeks, and nobody will let me forget that one. But it was pretty much whenever I met Tyler and we started talking about, how our training and everything was and just how we learned things over the years. Tyler's training and mine was very much this, the exact way he does things now, which was drill after drill after drill. They made sure that our cardiovascular was up to snuff. It was, oh gosh, so many drop down, leapfrog, arm drag spots. Oh God, I think by week 3, I pretty much knew that in my sleep and could do it. Like, you could wake me up out of a dead sleep and just call that, that particular spot, and I would just do it in my sleep and then just go right back to sleep again. Because it was just drill after drill after drill of just those basics and cardiovascular that they just drilled into us during, those 3 or 4 months that we were there.
So, you have any memories of your first wrestling match after all these drills and having to go to the bathroom and going to the bathroom on yourself, and when the hard work, any memories of when your hard work finally paid off with your first pro wrestling match?
Oh, yes, absolutely, because the very first match I had was actually with my trainer's tag team partner. My trainer decided to run his own show in a different state than Tennessee, and he booked some of the guys from the local area that he knew and a few others, including his tag partner. And it was going to be a new company, and it was going to be, running consistently in that town, in that area. So what he did was he set up a heavyweight title tournament for that entire show. And he had me go all the way to the finals of it. Of course,
And this was your
this is
first
my
show?
very first show.
Wow.
Yes, very first show. Yes, sir. Very first show I ever physically got in a ring and had any matches. He had me go to the finals of it, and he had me go up against some of the best veterans at that time that he could have put me with, because they knew how green I was, and they knew that that was quite literally outside of training. Match one and match two that night.
So who were those?
Yeah,
Who were those veteran names? You know, if they're somebody that maybe don't get a lot of love, or maybe somebody who don't know about them. Who were they, and how'd they help you out in those
sure.
first few matches?
Um, the first one, unfortunately, the gentleman is no longer with us. He has passed away as well. He went by Ham Hock. He was a part of a trios team called the Ham Bones. They were kind of like your Moondogs, I guess you could say,
Okay.
because the Moondogs in Memphis, they really just kind of stayed in Memphis. They did some traveling and everything, but they didn't do much. So these Ham Bones were kind of like an offset of them, and Ham Hock was one of them, because the other two Ham Bones actually wrestled my trainer and the guy who trained with me in a tag match on the show.
Okay.
And then who I faced in the finals was the gentleman went by Bone Crusher. He's still around. He's unfortunately not wrestling anymore because he is, of course, older. He was older then, but he's unfortunately really older now. And they were so patient with me and could tell that, I really had happy feet with everything that I was doing, because, I was just so excited to be in there. Um, that they really guided me. They're like, okay. And this is another thing. I'm sure you've had other guys talk about how, talk about things in the back and then go out and execute it. They didn't do any of that with me. They're like, we'll just do everything out there and, just listen and you'll be fine. And that's exactly what I did. If they tell me, hey, I want you to do this, that's what I did. They're like, hit me with this, boom. That's what I did. And I just kept up with them, just tit for tat, back and forth, back and forth. And I just got super lucky that they were just so giving with somebody so new, because they didn't have to.
Right.
Um, there was a couple times where like I knew I was getting tested, because there was a few shots in there that was given that probably would have you know made a few other guys quit maybe, but I'm like,
Right.
nah, because there was one that I remember specifically, with the hand bones gimmick. Of course, they came out with like large bones with them, like
Right.
femurs and everything. There was one where Hamhock, he had distracted the ref with taking a turnbuckle off. He grabbed the bone and then proceeded to just crack me across the skull with it.
Dang.
He didn't tell me that this was coming. And bink, just cracked me across the skull with it. And then once the stars kind of went away, I looked back towards the curtain where we were coming out and everything, and I seen my trainer just kind of peeking through it, just to watch, what I would do. I just sold it, and we kept going for another 10 minutes after that, and just didn't miss a beat, didn't miss anything. We got back through the curtain. He snatched me by my coveralls, my trainer did, pulled me in, gave me a hug, and he said, gosh damn it, Josh, you did a great job. Thank you so much. And I'm like, okay, there's a little vindication for that shot. I kind of figured it was on purpose. And then, 4 or 5 years later, whenever I seen Hammock again, and after my trainer passed away, I'm like, hey, what was up with that daggone shot you gave me with that bone during our first match? He's like, I had to test you. I'm like, I figured so, but dang, man, I'm gonna have to give you a receipt one day for this one. That sucked.
so,
He's like, nah, you're fine, kid. You're fine.
so okay, you mentioned that he grabbed you by your coveralls. Were you always Farmer Billy Hills, or were you trying to do some other Did you experiment with some other gimmicks or some other names earlier in your career before you came up to where I first became familiar with you?
No, sir. I have been Farmer Billy Hill since day one.
Awesome. So,
Yep.
okay, you meant first match. What year was this taking place?
Oh, 2004.
Okay. Okay.
2004. I think it was. I remember starting training in July, mid July of 2004, and then it was around the end of December, maybe early January to late January of 2005 was whenever that show in Rector, Arkansas was put on.
Okay. So, okay, that's your first match. Uh, what are some other memories of kind of being down in the Tennessee, Arkansas, the more southern area of wrestling that you feel comfortable sharing before you eventually made your way up to Southern Illinois and Southeast Missouri?
Of course, yeah, no, I don't mind talking about, any of these stories, within bounds because yeah, I've been a part of, some shenanigans at some shows and everything, but nothing that, can't be talked about for the
Right.
most part in public. So I've been privileged with that one. But let me uh let me see if I can bring up a good one. Okay, I got one. So do you know who Burt Prentice is?
I know who Burt Prentice is. Yes.
Okay, so he's the one that runs the USA Wrestling.
Hmm.
That every once in a blue moon just kind of trickles up this way,
Right.
like, and he um he had trickled up this way. Back technically back home where I'm from, he had trickled up and everything, and he was looking for some talent. He was looking for a couple people to wrestle, and then needed a referee as well. So of course, I'm like, hey, I will do whatever is needed. I don't care. He's like, okay, well, I just filled the wrestling spots. Can you ref? I said, I got a shirt in my bag. Like, I'm good, ready to go. He's like, cool. He's like, do you mind refing all night long? I said, nope. Just, throw me a couple bottled waters under the ring and I'll be fine. He's like, cool. Thank you very much. He's like, I'll make sure you get paid at the end of the night. I said, fantastic. So with that being said, being the only referee, lucky enough there was only 5 matches, and they all just ran consistently with no break, because it was a festival that we were at. Um,
Right.
with that being said, I didn't know any finishes to any matches whatsoever. I had to physically wait for the first guy to come out to the ring and be like, "Hey, who's going over?" And then he'd tell me, and then I would just have to, you know, watch the count basically. But on this particular show, Bert had brought in some. I want to make sure I use the correct term for what they like to be called, but little people.
Okay.
Because I know they got the micro brawlers, I believe, that come up here and
Right.
everything, but I want to make sure that I use the correct term for him. But he had a couple on the show. And of course, I know nothing about what's going to go on in any of the matches, nothing whatsoever. But here they come out, match 3. They're starting to do their thing, and I'm just watching, staying out of the way, reacting to what they do the best I can. And one of them goes for a pin. And he looks at me in the eye and he says, after your count, play with me. And I'm just like, what? So 1, 2, the guy kicks out, but whenever he kicks out, he lands on top of me, the guy who was doing the pin. And now he's like, all right, throw me back on him and count again. So I pitched him up. He landed on top of the guy. I counted again. 1, 2. Kicked him off, back on me. Kicked him back on the guy, 1, 2. And it was just the most ridiculous, like, what felt like 5 hours, like 45 seconds of my life. Just the most ridiculous, just 45 seconds of my life. And they get up from that because at the final one, he's like, all right. He's like, whenever you toss me this time, he's like, I'm going to go to the outside. So, I pitched him up, and he launched himself out of the top and second rope and just hit the side of the ring and then just off to the ground. They wrestled around a little bit more. Well, for the go home to their match, which was to set up their match for tomorrow, or not, I say tomorrow, but technically the next night, was they were doing a strap match for like their blow off for the weekend. I didn't know this. I had no idea. The heel, he went by Hollywood.
Okay.
He created some separation from the babyface, which I cannot remember his name ever to save my life. But Hollywood came over to me, and, he kind of gave me like a little, shove, but it was just to kind of get me back into a corner so we could talk to him. He's like, I'm going to take your belt off. He's like, we're going to a DQ. Don't DQ me up until after I take your belt, and hit him with it. So he proceeded, to just take my belt off, fold it up, and he lit that guy up. I mean, welted him up, because I seen him the next day too, and his back was just welted with about 3 or 4 shots from my belt, because I didn't think it was going to be used, like, at all, my belt or anything. So I put the thickest belt that I had just to make sure my pants would stay up. Because I don't have a butt, Eli. I never have. I don't have a hindquarters whatsoever, no matter what I do. So I get, the biggest, thickest belt that, I can, maintain to hold my freaking pants up so my butt don't show. He took that thing off, doubled it over, and just proceeded to wear that guy out. And, yeah, the next day he had 3, 4 good welts on his back, and I'm just like, man, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. If I had known he was going to be doing that, I would have wore a smaller belt. He's like, man, it's fine. But that was just some of my first memories of doing some of this outside of my trainer and training partner. Whenever I started to kind of break out away from them and do my own thing, and it was from that show that started getting me up here. Because Bert brought me to a couple things up this way and showed me how to start kind of branching out.
That's something I'm going to ask you. Bert Prentice, a lot of the guys I've talked to have had different sorts of experiences with Bert Prentice. And then you've heard,
oh, yeah,
there's a lot of different people probably have a lot of different things to say about Bert Prentice. Now, most people I've talked to for this program have good things to say about Bert. What about you?
I do too.
Okay.
Yep, I do too. Because I will be 100% upfront and honest with you. I have never had any negative experience with Bert whatsoever. He's always done nothing but help me. Anytime that he's seen me, which was 3 times since 2006, 2007. I've only seen him 3 times and worked for him all 3 times basically. And he hasn't remembered me on any of them whatsoever. But I always make sure I'm like, I know who Bert Prentice is. I know he's very respected and he does have connections, even though he does have these stories about him. I'm still going to be a professional because I'm a professional wrestler, and I'm going to ask him questions, and I will still pick his brain, but keep on my toes about it, I guess you could say. And he always kept everything very professional with me and always answered any question that I had for him. And even he's only yelled at me one time, but it wasn't out of anything anger-wise. Luckily, it was more so after one of the matches I had. He he came running back into the locker room. He's like, the next time I see you, if you don't have a goat with you, I'm kicking your ass. I said, yes, sir. And I ain't seen him since, and that was like 4 years ago.
Do you have the goat in case you see him again?
Sadly, I do know some people. So I absolutely could. I absolutely could have a goat. If I ever work another show with him, I'm going to hit them up. Hey, can I borrow one of your goats for a few hours? I'll be like, why? Just don't ask questions. I'll tell you when I bring it back.
All right, so I guess we'll stick with this for right now. But so you go, you're working for Bert. You know, you met him a couple times, done a few things for him. You mentioned that you've been lucky enough to do some shots with Memphis on TV. What's that like? Take me through your experience on Memphis TV.
Sure. It was outside of because the couple little things that I've done in Impact and some of the WWE stuff that I've seen and done as well, um, they're not on that kind of scale
Right.
whatsoever, but they're still very similar. You know, of course, the budget is smaller, but everything is still pretty much ran the same because most of the time the guys that are running the Memphis TV have gone there, probably done a little bit of that, learned what
Right.
they could, and then brought it back down here, which is, what I do because got to have the next generation ready for this, right?
Right.
But so pretty much whenever I did it, call time was at 10 a.m. So I'm a person that I have to be there an hour early, if not, earlier if possible, because I was raised if you're on time, you're late. If you're early, you're on time.
Gotcha.
So I was there, I waited for others to show up, and then finally was able to get into the building. I kind of got my surroundings of where everything was. And they're like, okay, because I don't want to throw anybody under the bus with this particular story, but they're like, did so-and-so send you your script in your email? I said, no, I did not get a script. I just got, be there at this time. They're like, gosh dang it. Okay, hold on. So they ran to the office and they printed me one off, and they're like, okay, here is the entire show. They're like, for what it is right now. And lucky enough, it didn't really change much. For me, it was myself and my tag partner against another local tag team that was pretty much for them at the time kind of on their way up. So they needed me and my tag partner at the time to just come in, play the bad guys, and really boost them up.
Right.
So that was pretty much our job, and that was kind of the bullet points in the promo that they gave us, because they didn't write the promo out verbatim what they wanted us to say. They just wanted us to hit, who we are, because we hadn't been there yet, who we're facing, and since this was going to be on TV, when and where to watch it, and
Right.
that whole spiel. So, I hit all the bullet points in the promo. My tag partner took it home. Boom. They're like, and they just kind of like, after that one take, it was silent. And I'm like, oh no, did I mess this up? I'm like, I don't think I cussed. I don't think I did anything. They're like, did we mess up? They're like, no, but that's the first one take we've had all day. They're like, so thank you. I'm like, yes. I'm like, that's what I like. One and done, baby. And then, we go out there, and it's a typical TV setup. So whenever you go out, your hard cam is to your left. You have two cameras on the floor. So that was, just, your typical thing. Sorry, no, hard cam is to the right. Dadgummit. If I can ever get my lesson rights figured out, I'll be doing just fine. Hard cam's to the right, two on the floor, and you had a photographer down there as well. So that was something, very typical, because I think they were expecting the promo to take a little longer than what it did, but we hit it with enough gusto and we hit all the bullet points exactly how they needed it, that our time slot that they had like chucked out for us, we didn't even use 3/4 of it at all. So we had a bunch of, like, unfortunately, just kind of sitting around time. So, we went down by the ring, worked out a little bit of the match with the other guys who were in it that we needed to put over. And that was pretty much it. I mean, the crowd there was, goodness gracious, they were insane, and I loved it.
You always hear the
I
stories
was
about that
able.
Memphis TV crowd.
Oh my God, Eli! It was so much fun, man. It was so much fun because it was. I was able to get off one of my favorite one-liners to people that I love to just throw out to some of these just towns and territories that I go to. Um, with it being Memphis wrestling, it is the epitome of just elegant white trash. I
I
know that
mean,
sounds weird, but they really are. Like, they're dressed nice and all this other stuff, but then when they start yelling at you, you hear all this slang and everything else. You're like, dressed like that, but you talk like that? Like, I bet your house is like a double wide, double stacked trailer park something or another, ain't you? But I will never forget it. We're we're making our entrance, and there was a larger lady in the back row just giving me the business, just running me into the ground. Now, mind you, whenever you work in TV, you never really want to acknowledge this stuff. You know what I'm saying? But I'm like, you know what? I'm kind of gonna break my rule here, and I'm gonna do it. Like, I'm going to acknowledge this because this woman is ripping me a freaking new one. If I don't do something about it, I'm not going to get the heat that I need because I'm looking like a complete fool right now. So music comes down, and I'm just like, I only need 1 minute, but I got to get this out of this freaking lady. So I took the mic from the ring announcer, and I see the light on the hard cam come on because it wasn't on for the entrance, because the entrances is just done by the cameras on the floor, right? But this lady was sitting hard cam side, and I turned to face her, and then I see the freaking red light come on, and I'm like, uh-oh, screw it, I'm going to say it anyways. I'm like, okay, first off, I cannot stand this podunk white trash town that this company has freaking brought us to, especially you, fatty, in the back. Let me tell you something right now. I am not only a professional wrestler, I am a dadgum businessman. And whenever you come here, I can tell just by looking at you. You paid at the door with your food stamps. Next time you come here, you pay with money because that's what I want from you. Now sit there and shut your mouth. And I handed the microphone back.
that's actually not too bad. That's a good line.
And here's the bad part about it, Eli, is everybody died laughing after I said, next time you come here, don't pay with your food stamps. I want your money. Everybody died laughing, and I'm like, well, something worked. Like, I got some sort of reaction, even if it was a giggle. I'm like, I'll take it.
So,
But I get to the back, and I look at the guy who booked us, and I'm like, "Hey, how was it?" He's like, "It was great." He's like, "It was exactly what we needed it to be." And he's like, "I want to let you know. At first, they were pissed off that you took that little bit of mic time, but they're like, I'm pretty sure they're gonna keep that. Whenever they do the cut of this and play it, I'm pretty sure they're going to keep that in there." I'm like, yay! And sure enough, they did. They kept it in the match, and I'm like, all right, I love it. Thank you.
um,
I'm like, I'll take a little bit of a chewing out for it as long
right.
as it can still get put on TV. It's fine.
Um, I actually didn't know this before you just brought up, but you did some TV stuff with WWE and Impact.
So I okay, let me try and think of my time frames here. I want to say it was roughly 7 or 8 years ago, whenever I first came up here. I'm sure you heard of IWAU, right?
Yes.
Okay, cool, cool, cool. So we were doing shows in Mount Vernon. IWAU was. They had a building and everything there. We used to run on Sunday afternoons. There was only 5 wrestlers on the entire show. Me and I'm sure you know Joey O'Reilly,
Yes.
uh, A.T. Brooks, Josh Totten, and Scott Parker. That's
I'm
all we had for an entire year. Um, with that being said, of course, they have their shows up there in Alney and Noble. Whenever it came time to do a blow off for our shows from Sunday, we would do it on the big shows up there in Alney. There was a blow off that we did, and I was working somebody similar in my size. It was Blake Reed. I think you might have seen him around, maybe. Blake Reed. He kind of works for 01
I haven't seen him
USA
yet,
sometimes.
unfortunately. I have not yet. But
That's okay. We're pretty much the exact same size. He's maybe a little bit bigger than me, but not by much. Um, and we go and have our blow off match up there. And we're like, you know what? We want to do something, just weird and different and just have a little fun. So we quite literally kind of mimic the Hulk Hogan versus Andre the Giant matchup where we kind of work the whole match around the body slam and, working my back and then trying to body slam him because at the time he was bigger than me. I didn't know that the referee at the time was fixing to leave to go work for WWE. And he was my ref. I
okay.
had no idea. So we worked through the match. Boom, I get the big victory, blah, 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 blah. I get to the back, and he kind of pulled to the side. He's like, dude, you are so freaking over with these people. He's like, you could have went out there, picked up a baby, tossed it down these flight of stairs from the top of this building, and they still would have loved you for it. He's like, you guys went out there and put on an amazing match. He's like, thank you for letting me be a part of, pretty much my final match down here on the Independence. And I'm like, really? It's going to be your last one? I'm like, are you retiring or something? He's like, no. He's like, just keep this hush hush. So he got his phone and he showed me, his contract and everything. I'm like, oh, dude, I'm like, that's freaking amazing, dude. Congratulations. Because it's like the first time I'd ever met anybody going on their way up.
Right.
And me and Tyler both just kind of, kept in contact. We still keep in contact with him, you know, just over all of these years. So anytime WWE's in town, I always meet up with him. He always teaches me, pretty much anything he's learned since the last time, we talked and spoke and everything. Because I don't like to bother him because I know he's a busy dude. So I touch base with him, once or twice a month, just to make sure, even though I know he's still alive, he's still alive.
Right.
Um, but anytime, he's down here in this area, we always meet up, we chit chat, we talk live, and then of course, I pick his brain on whatever he's learned since the last time we talked. So I've had those dealings, and then do you remember when TNA was doing those their weird little tryouts with like Al Snow and stuff?
Yeah,
Those
the
gimmick
gut
tryouts?
check.
Yeah, those things. Well, they brought them down here to our area, and this is where the Samoa Joe thing comes into play. They brought that down here. Sure enough, some of these people that was booked to do this gut check gimmick did not know that you needed a Missouri wrestling license, that you had to go get blood work done and a physical, or else you ain't doing nothing in Missouri whatsoever. A lot of the people that was booked for the gut check did not know this, and a lot of the workers from TNA that were supposed to be on this show didn't know either. So gut check unfortunately didn't happen, and the show almost got canceled as well. There was, have you ever like reminisce about some of the SmackDown matches where match one happened and then it bled into match two with like different people, but sometimes the people in match one kind of interfered in match two, and then that match two became a tag match in the main event?
Yes, I know exactly what
That's
you're talking
pretty
about.
much what had to happen. That's unfortunately pretty much what had to happen at this TNA show. I think the only single match, singles wrestling match that was able to happen was Kurt Angle versus Jeff Hardy. I think was unfortunately like the only singles match that was able to happen.
Oh
Uh,
wow.
was Yeah, it was tough. It was Bully Ray versus James Storm, then Devon versus Bobby Roode, and then that of course became a tag match um, in the main event, and then there was Kurt Angle and Jeff Hardy. There was another one, but I unfortunately, I don't want to get. No, aha, I do remember Samoa Joe and Frankie Kazarian.
Okay.
That was and it was at that show where I finally met Samoa Joe and talked to him for good 30, 45 minutes and just picking his mind for anything I possibly could, and just pretty much just thank him for giving me the confidence in myself to pursue this.
And how was Joe? Just talking to him as uh, a
Absolutely
peer.
amazing. Yeah, just one thing, and this is something I like to pass on to some of the younger guys, is something that I learned, you know, a long time ago, and something very quickly is when you're in the locker room with these guys, do everything possible to not fanboy out. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Remember where you are, and remember you're in the same locker room with them. Treat them with respect, first off, but also just treat them like a human being. Don't just immediately just run up to these guys and be like, hey man, can I pick your brain? Because they get that everywhere they go. Walk up to these guys, introduce yourself, and be like, "Man, how was your trip down here? I see you make it okay, but you know, how was it? Flight okay? Car ride down good? You know, just ask them how their freaking life is doing. Just treat them like a human being." And that's something that I made sure to do with him, and which opened up the door to being able to respectfully, in my perspective, pick his brain, because I introduced myself, and considering I was from the area, I asked him like, how was your trip down from St. Louis? Did you make the 2 hour drive, or did you fly down here on the little hour shuttle that they got? He's like, yeah, man. He's like, I flew down here on that little jumper flight. I'm like, that's cool. I'm like, I use that thing too sometimes whenever I go to St. Louis. Even though that was an absolute lie. I don't use that thing. I'm scared of flights. So I always make that drive. But and I just make sure to just treat him like a human being. And right whenever um, the show was kind of fixing to really come to a conclusion, and everybody kind of leave out, I wanted to make sure to just again thank him for everything he had just instilled in me, and pretty much giving me the confidence to you know pursue this crazy business. And he was really appreciative, and really liked that I sent him to a very nice Cajun restaurant there that we have in town. He really made sure to send a message through a mutual friend of ours that he really enjoyed that.
Was it Broussard's?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
It was. It was Brassard's that I sent him to.
Okay. If anybody listening to this not from the area ever makes their way to Cape Girardeau, definitely hit Broussard's up if you like Cajun food.
Absolutely, they are amazing. Hit up Brassard's if you're into Cajun. If you want some authentic Ireland food, O'Reilly's right down by the waterfront. Absolutely amazing as well.
That's the. Those are the two. If anybody co- comes to Cape, definitely hit those up. Um, we're an hour into this, and I haven't even been able to ask you about the thing that I thought would be the biggest talking point, and that is how I first became familiar with you, and that is AAPW. How did you get started with that promotion? Because there, especially when they got TV, you were quite a large had a large role in that promotion. So how did, to the best of your recollection, AAPW come about?
Of course. It was right about the time that Facebook was, for the most part, kind of created. Like it had maybe been around like a couple years, but it wasn't what it is right now. And the booker of it at the time, Golden Boy Greg Anthony, he was the guy who was the booker of matches and everything at the time. So that was about the time that they first got TV as well. And he was wanting to bring in some fresh faces for it. He had already kind of, picked a few out, but he was looking for a couple of more. And he's like, I'm going to be doing this tryout here. This is how much it's going to cost. Be there. If I like you, I'll put you on TV. I was the only one that showed up, Eli.
Wow.
I
Wow.
was the only one that showed up. So he's like, well, you're the only one with enough apparently guts around here to show up to want to be on TV. He's like, so you got the job. I'm like, sweet. And that's literally like that's all it took. He for the most part, he had already seen a few of my matches and everything that I had, because whenever I reached out to him about it through, Facebook, he asked to see what few matches I had, available, because YouTube was, kind of a small little thing at the time too. So I sent him, the links to what I had up there at the time. And he's like, I can tell that you know your stuff. He's like, but you could definitely use a little bit of work. He's like, but show up at this. And he's like, if you show up at this, he's like, I'll work with you, just to kind of tighten up your stuff. I'm like, great. Thank you, man. I greatly appreciate that help, because I know I need it. And I did. And I was just the only one that showed up to it.
So you get
And
started. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, go ahead.
Well, you get started in AAPW. They just get TV, and I know for me personally, I was following that promotion, uh, kind of in the more humble beginnings days. Should you should maybe put that way, but
Yes.
so I see him on TV, and it's kind of, other than the roster, it kind of feels like a different promotion, just from my perspective. That's not a bad thing. It's just kind of how I felt seeing it come up. What was your first impression of the locker room when you kind of started getting integrated into the shows? There was the regulars, there was the people they were bringing in, like Golden Boy Greg Anthony. What was your first thoughts of the AAPW locker room?
I was scared to death of it.
Really?
Yes, because all of these guys that was in that locker room, Eli, were guys I was trying to get on shows with, and I couldn't get on shows with them.
Really?
So now, where I was getting denied bookings to get on shows with these guys, now I'm in a locker room with them finally, and for the first time ever for myself, not for these guys, it's on freaking TV. I'm going to make myself look like a giant turd. If I don't step my game up right freaking now. I felt the most immeasurable amount of pressure possible going into that stint originally with AAPW. I felt so much pressure and I was absolutely scared to death because you had your Edmund Livewire McGuire's, you had your Greg Anthony's, your Playboy Paul Rose, your Shane Rich, Casey's Finest, Mississippi Madman. You had all of these just
And
large life guys
and
for this area.
real quick, you mentioned Madman. I don't believe I've been able to talk about Madman here on the podcast since he passed. God love that
Uh,
man. God love that man.
Absolutely. God, he was so amazing. Just the best human. God, I love and miss him so much. Because he was so helpful with me. He always loved my matches and he always wanted to work with me, and I never got the chance to.
Mm,
The closest he and I ever got to do anything in a ring together was for Kevin Huntsberger's birthday. That was it.
wow.
That was the closest we ever touched inside of a ring ever. And it breaks my heart because I wanted to take that freaking moonsault from him so bad. Even if it killed my entire insides, I wanted it. But yeah, just being on a show with all those guys was very intimidating for me. Um, you can't tell, as everything progressed, and I really tried my best to not show that on TV. And doing everything now, you couldn't tell, but I was scared out of my mind because of just how intimidating it was to finally be in a locker room with all these guys who were such legends locally, and it's for TV too. I'm like, oh God, please don't crack the bed on this. And lucky enough, my very first match that I had on TV, I want to say, yeah, it was against Playboy Paul Rose, which was lucky enough somebody I had wrestled 100 times already. Um, we went out there. We had pretty much a match we had just had the week before at another company. We just tweaked it for TV, basically. And the locker room, of course, watched it because we had the monitor in the back. And they're like, dude, you did great. They're like, you need to work on this, 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 and this. It's like, but if that's the first time you ever been on TV, they're like, you did a great job. They're like, but you need to work on selling, your facial expressions and, a few other little things this way so that people can see this and then people can catch this. This camera can catch that. So after that first match, I went from being scared to death to humbled and accepted in mere minutes. And also appreciated by them as well for coming in and listening to what they just said, and then the following show applying every single bit of it that they had told me to do, because they said from that first show with Playboy versus that match that I had with Greg Anthony, the next one, they're like it was a night and day different person. They're like, so we really appreciate you listening to us and taking our advice. And from that point on, I was truly accepted in with those guys.
So one of the things, especially with my AAPW guests, I always go back to, which was the big show they had in January of 2012, main event. They had
Yeah.
Kevin Huntsberger, friend and former guest of the show, local news anchor, wrestles, uh, Colt Cabana, Pac, El Generico,
Yeah.
Matt Cross,
Yes.
all booked on the card, and also and I've sidebar, you know, AAPW being the last promotion I ever expected to see those guys booked at. They're all booked. That's not knocking AAPW. It's just that's not whenever I thought of those talents. I didn't think of AAPW booking them.
Oh, no, absolutely. And I'm sure you heard how all of that came about from your previous guests because you've had Shane Rich on here, you've had Edmund.
Yeah,
I'm sure you heard how all of that came about,
I've never heard about
having
the
those guys there.
I've never really heard about the talents per se. Let's get to this because unfortunately this is going to take as grave a night as this was. It's going to take a bit of an unfortunate turn as I learn through the various other interviews I've done. So how did this come about?
Oh, no problem. No problem. Uh, so how all of that came about, where all of that talent got brought in, was Greg Anthony got the boot.
I know about him getting the
Book
boot
taken away
later on
from him.
later on in the evening,
Yes.
but yeah, we were going to get to that. We were going to get to that.
Oh yeah. So that's pretty much how all of that came about. Was he got the boot, and Sean wanted new talent in his company instead of the usuals. He's like, I need to freshen the place up a little bit. So he gave the book to somebody else. I don't know if their name can be said or not, but
It's been
he used to work.
Sean told the whole story on his episode. He's been a guest as well, so you can go ahead and you can
Okay,
give all the details. Sean
gotcha.
Sean kind of laid it all out there. What happened?
Alrighty. So, he gave the book to Chris Hackstrom and Adam Testa, and, they are, of course, fans of, the more modern wrestling.
Right,
Your Ring of Honors at the time and your Pro Wrestling Guerrillas at the time, they were a fan of that wrestling, so they wanted to bring some of those talents in, especially since Main Event was going to be a pay-per-view ish DVD sale as well,
right,
because they were recording that one for DVD purposes. So they wanted to bring in some names to draw people into buying said DVD and video on demand at the time, like your Smart Mark videos where you buy it and download it and watch it.
right,
We
right.
wanted to, bring people into that as well. So that's where they booked your Colt Cabanas, your El Genericos, Pac. That's where they booked those guys from. And I'll be honest, outside of El Generico and Pac, I had already worked with Colt on a show before. Like, we pretty much sung karaoke
Right.
together. So we already knew one another, but that was also Main Event was the first time that I got to tag with Matt Cross because it was a 6-man tag, if I remember correctly, right?
No, that was at
It was
the summer
myself.
show. The summer show was the Matt Cross show.
Oh, that's right, that's right,
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, you're right, because Main Event
was when he
was the
wrestled.
5-man that I was in.
Yes, because Matt Cross was a
Yep.
surprise at main event, and I actually got a funny story about that from when I met Matt Cross at All In. um,
Oh, I
but
got to hear this.
no, basically, I just kind of like I was just he had his table set up at the convention. I'm talking to him, and I say like, hey, I doubt you remember this. My first time seeing you was you were a surprise at this show in Marion, Illinois, AAPW, and he's like, I do remember that show, because apparently like the aforementioned Pac, Generico, and Colt were doing a show, and that they were on. He's like, hey, we're going down here, and he's like, oh, see if I can get booked, and they're kind of like, well, we can't book you, and then they kind of like, we'll take less money if you put. This is his story, so I don't know if
Yeah,
Sean or
no,
somebody.
no,
Yeah,
that's 100% accurate.
yeah. He said like
Nope,
I
that
will.
is 100% accurate.
So he
Yep,
said like essentially, they paid him for that show, Pac, Colt,
pretty
and
much.
Generico. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
yep. That's pretty much the exact story that I was told too. They're like, we told them like we can't afford you. We're putting everything we already got into these guys and the show and our local guys as well because we're gonna pay them for this. So they're like, look, like we want him to come with us. We'll take a smaller pay cut. Cut our pay and then just we'll give it to him. They're like, so we ain't got to pay for it? I'm like, no, don't worry about it. Ta-da! Matt Cross, surprise!
yeah, and that was huge. Like that's one of my favorite surprise moments in wrestling. But so
Yes.
we've talked about all the fun stuff. Great night. AAPW its peak. You're in a 5-man. Matt Cross is surprise. Pac and El Generico. Both guys that eventually main event WWE shows and what have you. Live Wire McGuire tears the house down with Axe Allward. All this great stuff's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, behind the scenes, uh, the person that brought you into the company is getting ready to sever ties with this company, along with other people that he brings in. Were you
Yep.
privy to this tension with Golden Boy and Sean at the time?
No. Honestly, I was not to that one whatsoever. Not the first time that it was, kind of taken away from somebody. I was not privy to the Golden Boy one. But was I shocked by it? No, not at all. Golden Boy is very set in stone in his ways, in the fact of he only has these guys that he trusts, these certain set of guys. No matter where he goes, he's going to bring those guys with him because they know that they're going to get him over, and that's end of it. Like if the promoter or booker wants, other talent used, they're like, I'll fit them in where I can. He's like, but I'm gonna use my guys, and I don't think Sean liked that very much. He very much wanted, the local guys that had built AAPW up. He wanted those guys used a little bit more predominantly, I believe. So whenever Greg was like, I want to use my guys, they just couldn't. I don't think they could just agree on it. So I wasn't shocked by it whatsoever. The only one that I was shocked by was the second one,
Ooh.
which was the Chris one
Well, we'll
and
get
that
to.
separation.
Yeah, we'll definitely get to that. But real quick, you being kind of, I don't want to call you his boy, but like you being someone who Greg Anthony vouched for, and you continued to
Mm-hmm.
wrestle for AAPW. Did that cause any problems, or was it just kind of like, hey, business as usual? Let's do this.
No, it was very business as usual. Um, because Greg and I we didn't have a falling out until later on in life. And Greg never once told me to stop working for them. Never once did he say to stop working for those guys because he decided to stop booking shows for a while and just wrestle himself and not worry about booking shows, etc. He just worried about basically just the wrestling side of things. So he kind of took a break from the booking side of stuff. He never once said hey, don't work for those guys, just good luck getting a push now is pretty much kind of what he said.
So okay, he said, "Good luck getting a push now." But the very next major show they had, you're tag teaming with Matt Cross, who apparently, I guess, made a good enough impression that he got brought back. What was it like teaming with
Yep.
Matt Cross?
Oh, it was so much fun. It was so much fun because he was so open to ideas. that we had, he was very much, where sometimes whenever those bigger names come in, they like to, kind of, you know, do some things their way because they know what works best for them, and then, they will work you into that. Matt was not that way. Matt walked up to the rest of us like, "All right, guys, what do you want to do? You got anything planned for me?" And we're like, "What? We thought you were going to map the whole thing out." I'm like, "No, what do you want to do?" So we all just stood there and just mapped everything out. And then once, we pretty much got our match together, we just sat around and just talked life for like an hour and a half till our match got ready. It was time for us to go do our thing. We just sat around and just, pretty much just kind of BS'd, I guess you could say, for, the hour and a half up until, it was time for us to go out and have our match. But he was just a regular dude. Just like how you kind of look at him and you perceive him to just like, man, he looks like just a dude,
Right.
that you would like to, just kind of hang out with. And he's exactly that. He's a guy that you would just love to just sit and just hang out with.
He
And
seemed
I
like
and I love doing that with him. It was an absolute blast
a
because
really
I've
cool
gotten to
dude
do
the
it with
few
him
times I
multiple
got to meet him.
times.
Yeah, he's seems
He
like
is.
one of the good guys in wrestling. You can
Absolutely. He really is. He really is just a genuinely nice dude. And anytime I've seen him since, he's like, "Hey, what's up, warehouse?" Because that's where he remembers me is from, the motorcycle warehouse.
right.
He does. He somehow, out of everything he's done, he still remembers me as warehouse. And I'm
That's
like, I'm
awesome.
fine with this.
That's
I'm fine
awesome.
with this.
Um, we're run out of time, and we got to get you back on here because I don't think we've even really scratched the surface of all that you've done. But last thing we got to talk about since we have started into AAPW, I've had so many people give their perspectives on the end of that promotion, and we kind of alluded to it a bit ago. I've had Sean on
hmm
here, I've had Shane on here, I've had Edmund on here. Were you aware that there were issues with Sean and Chris and Shane and Edmund going on behind the scenes? Because everything really ended abruptly. From the outside looking in, it ended very abruptly. Knowing after starting this podcast, I kind of know that things had kind of been simmering for a minute. Were you
Yeah.
were were you thinking that okay, hey, the shit's gonna hit the fan soon, or were you just kind of thinking, all right, cool, we're having another big show, Live Wire and Masters in his cage, we're gonna end it here, and we're gonna come back in 2013, and all's right with the world? Were you what where were you at with like at least as far as like finding out about all this and knowing about what's going on? What was your perspective on the end of AAPW?
So, from my perspective and everything that I had been told, which come to find out, some of it wasn't true, was what I had been told was that Chris Hackstrom's money was drying up. Um, because, of course, Chris was the one doing a lot of funding for these new belts that AAPW had. He was, of course, the one, him and Adam was, of course, the ones funding, bringing in, some of these bigger name wrestlers and more independent stars on the smaller shows, but then the really big name shows on, your pay per views, etc. That the well for the money was kind of drying up. And I also have been told where Edmund was kind of, frustrated, and Shane was frustrated as well with just how things were being portrayed on the TV and pay per views, where you have such larger than life character and storylines going with Edmund and to sit there and only really spotlight these, for the most part, nobodies on your TV, really put them over on your TV, and nothing about Edmund and his blow off that is coming in this cage on the pay-per-view. You only acknowledge it like once or twice on TV, and then expect people to be invested in a cage match on pay-per-view. People are going to be like, why is this happening? They were really frustrated with just how they were being perceived, and not really, they're doing all the work in ring and out of ring, but whenever the episodes are airing, you're not seeing any of it at all. So you're like, where's our build up for this? Why are we going to go out here and kill ourselves in this cage and barely anybody knows it's happening? They're like, well, we're promoting it on Facebook. That's it? You're just mentioning it on Facebook? What about this that we shot for TV? What about this that we shot for TV? What about this that you had to shoot for YouTube? Where's all this? They're like, yeah, well, we had to do this instead, and, then we had this guy and all this over here, and just excuse after excuse after excuse, for the most part, on why their big draw, which was, of course, that cage match between, Ed and, dang it, of course.
Masters.
Yeah, Masters. In the cage, that big blow off, if that's supposed to be your main event and your big attraction, why is it only getting mentioned on a Facebook status once a week? Maybe. Why aren't you throwing a little bit more into it on, your TV and your YouTube that you're doing? So there was a whole lot of frustrations, to my understanding, with how, of course, yes, the booking was going, and just how some of the talent that had been there from day one was getting pushed out the door and being perceived as well now on TV with all of these, more kind of up and coming stars that are kind of local. I was lucky not one of these guys. Everybody, was fine with me because I kind of stayed in that middle ground and lower card. I never quite surpassed that mid card range. So I was never a part of the.
You were over as fuck, though. I gotta say that much.
Thank you very much. I greatly appreciate that. But I kind of stayed in that range. But the guys who were getting pushed beyond me, that hadn't even been there as long as I was, or had been at that time, and was getting some of the other AAPW established stars booted off of shows. It just wasn't going over well with, guys like Shane and Edmund and Sean, for that fact. They're like, why are these guys getting booted that have been here since day one and helped build this thing, for these guys that, sure, they're going off and doing other things around, around us, but nobody knows who they are like they know these guys. Sure, they got a little bit of internet buzz, but they're not going to bring people from 5 hours away like, KC, Madman. They're not going to bring, guys in like them. They're just not.
Right.
And whenever Pro Wrestling Collision started, they found that out the hard way.
And that will.
But going back to AAPW, that's just kind of what the scuttlebutt that was given to me was. I seen the frustrations and the money issues coming from a while away, because I always kind of sat and kept to myself. But you could always see it on Edmund and his face, because I know Edmund. I don't know him very well, but I know Edmund enough to know when he's frustrated and when he's not happy. Edmund has a very particular demeanor. He is always happy and go lucky. You can tell when that man isn't and when he's about to lose his mind. And I seen him at that boiling point, and I stayed clear. Eli, I made sure to not be in that man's way whatsoever. And I knew something was amiss right then and there. And then I hear the little rumblings about, why. It's because of Chris and Adam and how they're booking things. Then I hear about the money issues, and I'm like, well, it was a good run, fellas. I guess I'll see you on whatever the next one is. And sure enough, that next one was Pro Wrestling Collision.
We'll get into Pro Wrestling Collision as well as a bunch of other stuff. That because I mean I know you're doing Cape Championship Wrestling, and I'm sure you got more
Oh,
stories.
yeah.
But I'd love to have you
Oh, I
back.
got plenty.
I'd love to
Yeah,
have you
heck yeah.
back.
Absolutely.
But yeah, do you have? First of all, I gotta thank you. This was I'm just gonna level with everybody. There's sometimes, I'm like, well, I really hope we can get, I really hope we can get a solid 45. Not knocking anybody, not knocking anybody who I've done a podcast with. Everybody's been awesome, but it's just kind of like from my end, I'm like, well, I hope I have enough to talk about to, from my end to, be able to fill a full episode. But it was not a problem with this one.
No, sir. No, I will never give you any kind of problem with anything like that whatsoever. I got stories for days. I do not mind talking about it whatsoever.
So, um, if there's somebody that's never seen you or would like to follow you on social media or check out some of your matches, do you have anything on YouTube? Do you have any public social media for anybody? Plug that in case there's a new listener who's just found out who Farmer Billy Hills is today.
Of course, yes. On Facebook, you can, of course, find me at Billy Hills or Farmer Billy Hills for that fact. On Instagram and Twitter, you can find me at FBH05. Snapchat is Billy underscore Hills 05. You can follow me there. My YouTube is under Billy Hills as well. You can find pretty much all of my matches that I am legally able to record and put up is up there as well. Unfortunately, with all of the TV and pay-per-view work that I have done recently, unfortunately, my YouTube is very lacking with my matches, unfortunately, because of just, contractual stuff. I don't want to get myself or any company in trouble. But if you just Google, or not Google, but just search in YouTube Farmer Billy Hills, all of that will pop up because they have all of it up there for you to, of course, watch at your leisure, along with my own channel as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again. We're definitely going to have you back on and check out
I
his
will be happy
matches.
to anytime.
Check out his matches. Check him out on social media and check me out on social media. Facebook.com/AthleticGeekA9. Twitter Athletic_GeekA9. Instagram AthleticGeekA9. If you enjoyed, please give a like, share, subscribe for more content, not just from the world of wrestling, but from the world of anime, gaming, comic books, all things geek culture. And if you'd like to help improve this channel financially, I am on Patreon. Patreon.com/AthleticGeekA9. Check out Billy Hills, and we'll see you next time.